We good, Rhea? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending tonight's Technical Advisory Committee. I welcome all of you on YouTube and our illustrious cast of characters here with the Technical Advisory Committee of MBTA. I want to start with the resolution finding the need to conduct a meeting electronically as a result of the COVID-19 and Governor Northam's declaration of a state of emergency. The authority's Technical Advisory Committee meeting is being held electronically. With the recent passage of the amendments to HB 29, the Freedom of Information Act bill, which allows regional bodies such as the authority and their committees to conduct business meetings electronically, this evening's business meeting is being held remotely. Doing so will enable us to keep safety as a top priority while ensuring that we're adhering to social distancing requirements. Meeting by electronic means is authorized because the items on the February 17th, 2021 committee meeting agenda are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the authority. We need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Here a second?
Second.
Okay. Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, the resolution is passed. We had the summary notes of the November 18th, 2020 meeting passed out to us previously. Did anybody have any comments or questions on those? I did not. Seeing none, I move that we, I need a motion to approve the meeting summary as is.
Motion to approve.
And
Second.
Thank you. Any opposed, say nay. Hearing none, the meeting minutes or meeting notes are approved. And next would be the meeting schedule, the draft meeting schedule. Obviously, there's today, and we're going to be monthly through July with a typical August recess, so we can all enjoy our summer, and then September, October, November, December. And they're all in the middle of the month. You can see them there. I presume they're going to be posted online. Rhea, is that correct?
That is correct, Chair Boyce.
Thank you. So I guess, is there do we need to have a motion to approve this? Or is this just for information?
That is correct, Chair Boyce. We need a motion to approve the calendar year 2021 meeting schedule.
Very well, thank you. Is there a motion to accept this?
So moved, Pat Turner.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Armand. So, and anybody opposed, say nay. Hearing none, it is approved. So next on the docket is our Transportation Technology Strategic Plan. Have at it. Mr. Jasper.
Thank you, Chair Boyce, and good evening, members of the Technical Advisory Committee. A new subject tonight, although it is tied to transaction, so you can think of it as something that's going to feed into transaction over the coming months, but it also will exist in its own form in parallel over a period of time, and it is draft, so we are looking to review this with you over the next couple of meetings and get your feedback. And at some point, we'll be asking for a recommendation to take this to the authority for approval. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please, Rhea. So I just wanted to kind of take a big step back. MBTA staff and our Transportation Technology Committee have been working on this over a period of probably a couple of years now, although we really gathered pace in the fall and the early part of this year. So we've kind of become very accustomed with the details and the weeds, as it were, and recognizing that we've not brought this to the TAC before. I wanted to give you a bit of context as to why we're doing this. And this slide here entitled "The Fourth Industrial Revolution" is really kind of setting the stage of how technology has changed over, maybe since, particularly since the mid 1800s, up until which point, there was no industrial revolution. There was kind of like evolution of human power and harnessed horse and other animal power. And then we kind of reached the first industrial revolution with water and steam in particular, which enabled industry to be mechanized. Towards the end of the 1800s, electricity became available in a widespread manner, and that really enabled mass production to take off. And then kind of in the post Second World War years, we saw more and more in terms of electronics and information technology, which kind of took us down the path of automation. And then more recently, the digital revolution has begun to arrive, and that is now transforming not just production, but management and governance as well. And in many ways, the pandemic has kind of, I think, accelerated this a little bit because of the need to use some of the technologies associated with the digital revolution to enable government and business to continue as best it can in a much more remote format than has hitherto been the case. But I would say the digital revolution is really characterized by exponential increases in computing power, the emergence of big data and artificial intelligence, global connectivity, which kind of has been a feature of most of the industrial revolutions, but now it's just lightning speed connectivity around the world. And also, it's not just the changes that are happening; it's the speed at which those changes are happening and causing disruption, which really brings us to this point. And the quote you see is from Klaus Schwab, who wrote a paper which I can give you a link to about this if you're interested or more. But he's also, I think, the founder of the World Economic Forum. And so about 5 years ago, he kind of wrote a paper, and these are the highlights from it. And this particular quote I found was quite compelling, that there has never been a time of greater promise or one of greater potential peril. And I think that's a really good way to think about what we're going to talk about here with the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan, in that there is enormous opportunity that comes with transportation technology, but at the same time, if it's not done in a reasonably controlled or regulated way, it can do quite a bit of harm as well. Next slide, please, Ria. So just to give kind of one example, and not seeking to endorse any manufacturer or any product, so this is just an example. On the left side of this timeline, I want to take you back to 24-25, when Apple put together a secret team working on a new product, a new computer product that did not have a physical keyboard or a mouse or a stylus, if you remember those days. But it uses a touch screen, and as that development team worked, harnessing communications technologies as well, it became, as we all know, the iPhone, which was launched as the iPhone 2G. 2G, I think here means second generation communications, but it was launched in January of 2007, became available for retail purposes later that year. And then over the next 10 years, also keep in mind at the time that the iPhone was launched, there was no app store. That came a little bit later. But 10 years after the launch of the iPhone, the App Store contain 2.2 million apps, and I think there's some crazy number of downloads, something like 130 billion downloads had taken place cumulatively by that time. Yeah, and a couple of years beyond that, the launch of the iPhone 12. So just absolutely exponential growth. These days, the first iPhone is considered as clunky and not kind of great functionality compared to where we are with the iPhone 12 and the camera technology and everything else that goes with it. So that's what's happening, and that's what has happened over 13 or 14 years with the iPhone. And on the right side of this timeline, just want to kind of match that against the evolution of MBTA, which I would say is, as governmental agencies go, is actually pretty fast moving itself, has innovated and evolved rapidly over a similar timescale from July 2002, when we were created by the General Assembly, through several iterations of updates to our long-range transportation plan, our revenue stream being created in June of 2013. And since that time, we've allocated $2.5 billion in regional revenues, and over the same time period of revenue, that there'll be about $1 billion for our local 30% revenues as well. So the point here being really that over the next 10, 15 years, what will Apple be doing and other technology companies, and what will government agencies be doing as well in recognition of what's coming? With that context, let me just go into very quickly the TTSP, as we call it. Next slide, please, Ria. So I'm going to give you a quick overview here, introduction with some Q&A, I guess more like FAQs, frequently asked questions. Summary of the strategies that are in the draft plan and MBTA roles. And a little bit of detail about how the technologies are mapped to strategies and guidance on the feedback we'd like from you. So if you go to the next slide, Ria. I think you've had this presentation, so I'm not going to read all the slides to you, but I just wanted to say that by way of introduction, that the draft transportation technology strategic plan identifies 8 strategies for yielding 9 MBTA roles, and wrapped with the 3 core values that we've talked about in previous meetings, those being safety, equity, and sustainability. And essentially, what we're trying to do here is figure out what should MBTA be doing in the face of transportation technology and the exponential growth that we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years, and the likely exponential growth we're going to see over the next 10 or 15 years. Next slide, please. So a couple of questions that come up along the way, which I think kind of bear a little bit of repeating here, just because they provide good context. So first of all, how does the TTSP fit with our current primary responsibilities, which are transportation planning and transportation programming or funding of projects? So in the big picture, basically, the TTSP is very complementary to transaction because it will integrate with it as well as living in parallel with it. It basically it's a direct match. It's something we touched on in the last update to transaction, but in the intervening 5 years, we've come to realize we've got to be a lot more proactive when it comes to transportation technology. Next slide, please. A question that we are repeatedly asked, and I'm sure you are asked the same questions as well, being in the transportation business. What has changed as a result of the pandemic, and what does that mean for the regional transportation system? As you know, we did our own research back in the summer and fall of last year, where we wanted to understand a little bit better the transportation impacts of COVID-19, and that work will continue in the next update transaction, which is happening now. In terms of how the pandemic has changed travel behaviours permanently, that still remains unclear. We do strongly believe there will be a new normal where we're likely to see more work from home than we have seen previous to the pandemic, but maybe not as much as we've seen during the pandemic. But we don't really know what the final balance will be. It's still probably some months, if not years away. So we want to be cautious and open to change, but we don't want to do anything like that looks like a knee-jerk reaction and go too far in the wrong direction. So, we're hoping by the summer of this year things will be a bit clearer, and that still fits very well with the transaction schedule. Next slide, please. What's changed in terms of the role of technology? I think it's become apparent just how important technology has been over the last 12 months for transportation and beyond transportation. The amount of work from home that's been done within this region in particularly speaks very highly of the region. The adaptability of businesses with regard to changed shopping patterns and dining out and so on has been enabled by technology. But there have been some negative consequences as well. We've seen several rounds of stimulus funding for transit, and yet transit is still struggling. I think just yesterday we saw reports that VRE ridership is still 90% below the level it was pre-pandemic. So there's some real challenges, silver linings, as we've mentioned before, but some real potential negative outcomes as well, which we want transaction and the TTSP to consider. Next slide, please. Looking at political, social emergence of equity and environmental concerns, these are very much embraced within the TTSP through both the core values, equity, safety, and sustainability, as well as approaches within the individual strategies. And that's also, the core values have been embraced within transaction as well. Next slide, please. This is a tricky question asking about how different the role of technology varies within the 4 pandemic scenarios we looked at last year. I can't really answer this, but other than to say that in general terms, any of the 8 strategies that supports a willingness to travel in shared modes is going to be important. But all the technologies are going to rely on high quality data, without which much of the technology is going to be suboptimal or ineffective. So, it still remains to be seen exactly how transportation technologies are going to fit in. But there are some things to us, at least, that are very clear, particularly data. Next slide, please. Some examples have been suggested about priorities for technology under the new normal. So more demand responsive service, attractive and reliable bus service, electrification of the entire vehicle fleet, and technology helping to make things more cost effective. And as you'll see, many of the strategies address different aspects of this. Whether that be through normal bus service or electrification, I think there's a lot of this is addressed within the strategic plan and the strategies it contains. I would add that within these 8 strategies, we focused on things where there's an MBTA role. And where we've identified things that need to be done that are not necessarily being done. There are a number of other strategies going on across the region, which are much more mature in nature, and we've not looked to reinvent any wheels with our approach. So if there are technology approaches already underway with respect to fair payment, for example, we've not looked to duplicate that. We've acknowledged it. It exists. It's happening, but we focus on things where we, within these 8 strategies, where we see a need that's not currently being met. Next slide, please. Okay, so that gets me through those kind of FAQs, and you've already received the document in your meeting packet. It's structured as follows. You've got most of this information in a draft form. I think it's version 6 of the document. We may already be working on version 7 or version 8, I can't remember now, but the version you have does not include the action plan. We're still working with our Transportation Technology Committee on the action plan, so that is to follow. Hopefully we'll be able to get you sight of that before your next meeting, because really the strategies are fine, but if there's no action plan that goes with it, then nothing really is going to change. So the action plan is complementary and important part of the strategic plan. If this is the way it's structured. We've tried to make it as focused as we can, but there is a lot of information in there, a lot of contextual information explaining, why we're doing what we're doing, etc. If we go to the next slide, you'll see a basic template here, which you maybe not be able to read the details, but for each strategy within the TTSP, we try to focus on a particular format that is consistent from strategy to strategy. So this is how it will look. And then next slide, please. So the strategies themselves are listed here. Obviously, that template I showed you on the previous slide will go into much more detail about each of the strategies and how they relate to the core values and what the technologies are and so on. But this slide here attempts to summarize for each of the 8 strategies what the potential roles are for MBTA, and there are a total of 9 roles, and so you do see check marks where there's an intersection between a role and a strategy that makes sense, and the roles are kind of groups. The first 3 under the heading authority roles, as the name suggests, would require the authority to take action of some sort, and so these would be funding policy or advocate for a particular position through the legislative program. The middle 3 columns are what we call share roles, where MBTA would be involved with other agencies or jurisdictions or stakeholders. So these would be champion, facilitate, or stakeholder. And then the final 3 columns are specifically MBTA staff roles. So you see planning, which ties in with transaction, outreach and education, and the final one, observer, where we may just literally be a fly on the wall. So that summarized the kind of the combination of strategies and roles. And the next slide, I think we'll just briefly touch on the technologies or the technology groups that are associated with each of the strategies, and the key on the left indicates the extent to which each set of technologies applies to each strategy as we see it right now. Obviously, there's a huge amount of information behind this, but we wanted to try and summarize it as succinctly as we could. And the next slide, please, Rhea. This is what we're asking from you for tonight. Any thoughts or questions that you have on the ground I've covered so far, with respect to the 8 strategies in particular, but also the 9 MBTA roles? Is there anything we need to change or add? And beyond MBTA's committees, are there other organizations that you would recommend that we seek feedback from? are there any related initiatives that we should be aware of? As you see in the document, there are actually a lot of initiatives that we are already aware of that we've linked because we want to track those for their relevance to the strategic plan. But it's quite possible that there are some that we have missed. So please let us know or double check that we are aware of some that you're aware of, just to make sure that we are as well. And then looking further ahead, at some point, although this is a public meeting in the sense that it's an open meeting, we haven't really kind of got to the point yet where we've reached out publicly to get reaction. And one of the challenges that we need to kind of think through before we do that is the balance between level of detail and effective communication. So any advice you can give us, from a process standpoint on how to best accomplish that from previous experience that you may have from elsewhere, including any suggestions on low-cost visualizations that you can provide examples of, because we're all about pictures rather than words wherever we can. We request, if you will agree, that if you're able to provide us any feedback, that you do so via email by 2 weeks from now. If that's too onerous, then there's flexibility on that, but I just didn't want to leave it open-ended. Otherwise, there's a risk that any comments you provide will be out of sync with future updates of the document. So we're kind of setting a 2-week turnaround if that is feasible for you. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're working on the draft action plan, and we'll provide a version of that before your next meeting on March 17th. I'd also like to mention that on this call tonight, Mackenzie Love from our MBTA staff, who's worked closely on this. In fact, she's worked substantially on this document to get it to this point. She's also on this call. So if there's any in the weeds questions that I cannot answer, then I will probably defer to Mackenzie as we go through. So with that, Chair Boyce, I'll hand back to you and be happy to take any questions or comments that you have.
Okay. For the email back to staff, I would ask that the members email any questions or comments that you have to me by the Wednesday, March 3rd, and then I'll compile them and send them all as one, as the committee chair. We'll do that, please. Hopefully everybody has my email. It's in the invitation, should be there. rboyce@jmt.com. If anybody doesn't have it. Anybody have any questions? Frank?
On comments, can we just mark up the draft, or do you want specific lists of comments? Many of us, it'd just be easier to insert comments in the draft.
I don't see a problem with that. Keith, do you have an issue with that?
We provided the Word document. It already has some comments in it. So yeah, if that's the easiest for you, that's perfectly fine.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I can't see everybody. Just speak up. Sounds like we don't have any questions. I know I need to dive a little deeper into it. So thank you for that report.
That's great. I understand it's a large document that's about to get larger, and so there is a lot there, and we realize you're all volunteers, you've all got day jobs and your own lives to lead. So we appreciate any feedback or questions even that you can provide, and thank you, Chair Boyce, for coordinating the response. That makes our life easier. It makes your life harder.
What you pay me for? Wait a minute.
Right, yeah.
So, okay. Ms. Backman, do you have a report for us or an update?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will be brief. I do want to note that the 6th annual IETS Roundtable is coming up. It is Wednesday, March 10th. This year it will be virtual, of course, due to the pandemic. So and Keith and Mackenzie, I don't know if we have any more slots, but because it is virtual, we are limited to 100 slots in order for us to make sure that we can adequately accommodate everyone and work the platform. So I did want to note that. Additionally, at the authority's March meeting, and you guys are hearing this first, we are going to have an update of the Potomac Yard Metro Station that the authority funded to the tune, I guess, just shy of $65 million. We actually reimbursed the last invoice. So our funding commitment for that project has been achieved, and Mayor Wilson is planning to give the authority an update on the Potomac Yard Metro Station. In addition, we'll probably do a deeper dive into National Landing and the transportation infrastructure the the various modes that are involved in the National Landing area. Lastly, the 2021 General Assembly session update. It was a pretty low-key year for transportation, which is a good thing, even though we are still advocating for the restoration of authority revenues. We understand with the pandemic, what the crisis and has created. So while we still have that as a legislative priority, we were not exactly pushing to get those revenues back in this General Assembly session. So it was a low-key session for transportation. I do want to note, because we're doing this now, the ability to meet virtually. This was something that we were supporting, that NBTC was really championing. Anytime the governor declares a state of emergency, instead of having to go through some changes to get an emergency bill or emergency rendering legal opinion, just have that a bill on the table that allows the regional entities, the local governments, et cetera, give them the ability to meet virtually anytime the governor declares a state of emergency. So that is progressing along as well. And Mr. Chairman, that's all that I have.
Thank you. Unless anybody has any comments or questions for Ms. Backman, we can have a motion to adjourn and go about our day, get ready for some snow. Now that I got my truck out of the mud. Any questions for Ms. Backman or anything we've covered? One question I do have, for the document that was passed around, is there a place that is central that might be like a SharePoint site by chance, that instead of having 5 different copies with different comments on it, can we consolidate that by chance?
I don't think we have that capability at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay, this is if we are talking about maybe a Dropbox box, we can create that.
Would that, I mean, or a SharePoint site, different people can be in the same document working and see their changes.
Oh, that way.
Is that something that Dropbox can? I don't think Dropbox does.
No.
Yeah, no, we don't currently have that capability, I'm afraid.
No, we don't have.
Well, let me see if I can set something up, because I'd rather not get 7 different files with the same 7 comments on it. I will set something up after this meeting, most likely tomorrow, for the committee, if that's acceptable to the staff.
I see no reason why not.
Yeah, it just makes my life easier since I took it on. So, all right.
Okay.
Very good. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
Very good. All right. Thank you, everybody. have a great night and stay safe tomorrow.
Stay safe.